Chapter 1. Why Financial Discipline Feels So Hard. Most people assume financial discipline is difficult because they lack knowledge. They believe that if they just learned more about money, budgeting, or investing, everything would fall into place. But this belief collapses the moment reality shows up. Millions of people know exactly what they should do and still do the opposite. They overspend. They delay saving. They promise themselves they will start next month. The problem is not intelligence, it is biology. Your brain is not designed to prioritize long-term financial security. It is designed to keep you comfortable right now. Every impulse purchase, every ignored bill, every postponed savings goal is not a moral failure. It is your nervous system choosing certainty over discipline. Immediate rewards feel real. Future rewards feel abstract. This imbalance makes discipline feel like resistance against your own wiring. Financial discipline asks you to sacrifice comfort today for stability tomorrow. The brain hates this trade unless it is trained otherwise. When money decisions are framed as loss rather than gain, avoidance becomes automatic. Saving feels like deprivation. Spending feels like relief. Over time, this emotional pattern becomes habit. Habit becomes identity. You start to see yourself as someone who is bad with money, even when that label is learned rather than true. Another reason discipline feels hard is emotional attachment. Money is not just numbers. It represents freedom, safety, status, and self-worth. Every financial decision carries emotional weight. When emotions run high, logic weakens. Stress increases spending. Boredom invites impulse. Comparison fuels reckless choices. Without structure, emotion becomes the decision maker. Most people also underestimate how exhausting decision-making is. Every choice drains energy. What to spend, what to save, what to delay. When you rely on willpower alone, you eventually collapse. Discipline fails, not because you are weak, but because you are human. Financial discipline feels hard because it demands consistency without immediate reward. It demands patience in a world trained for speed. It demands restraint in an environment designed to tempt. Until you understand it, you will keep blaming yourself. Once you understand it, you can stop fighting your nature and start designing around it. The modern world makes financial discipline even harder by design. Everything around you is built to trigger impulse. One-click purchases, buy now, pay later systems, endless advertising disguised as entertainment. These systems are not accidents. They are engineered to bypass reflection and reward immediacy. When discipline fails in this environment, it is not because you lack character. It is because you are constantly being pushed toward consumption without pause. Another hidden factor is emotional relief. Spending often becomes a coping mechanism. When life feels heavy, money becomes a shortcut to comfort. A new purchase offers a temporary sense of control, novelty, or reward. The brain learns this pattern quickly. Over time, financial discipline starts to feel like emotional deprivation rather than responsibility. Saving feels like saying no to relief. Spending feels like saying yes to survival. This emotional association is what makes discipline feel painful. There is also the issue of delayed feedback. When you overspend, the consequence is rarely immediate. The damage appears weeks or months later. When you save, the reward feels distant and intangible. The brain struggles with delayed outcomes. It prefers actions that produce instant results, even when those results are harmful long-term. Many people also carry unconscious beliefs about money formed early in life. If money was associated with stress, conflict, or scarcity growing up, discipline can feel unsafe. Stability feels unfamiliar. Chaos feels normal. Without realizing it, people recreate financial instability because it matches their emotional baseline. Understanding why financial discipline feels hard is the first step toward mastering it. Once you see that resistance is built into the system, you stop personalizing failure. You stop relying on motivation. You stop trying to force yourself through sheer effort. Instead, you prepare to build discipline strategically, not by fighting your brain, but by working with it. Chapter 2. Discipline is identity, not motivation. Most people wait for motivation before they take financial action. They tell themselves they will start saving when they feel inspired, budgeting when they feel ready, and investing when they feel confident. This mindset guarantees inconsistency. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls with mood, energy, and circumstance. Discipline cannot be built on something that unstable. Financially disciplined people do not act because they feel like it. They act because it is who they believe they are. Identity is the invisible force behind behavior. When you see yourself as someone who is bad with money, careless with spending, or always behind, your actions will quietly align with that belief. You will sabotage progress without meaning to. You will rationalize impulsive decisions. You will reset every time momentum builds. Not because you want to fail, but because your identity demands consistency with how you see yourself. Disciplined people do not rely on motivation. They rely on self-image. They do not ask themselves if they feel like saving. They assume saving is what they do. They do not debate spending limits. They follow them automatically. Their discipline feels effortless, not because they are stronger, but because their behavior is aligned with identity rather than emotion. This is why motivation-based systems collapse. Motivation creates bursts of effort, followed by long periods of avoidance. Identity creates repetition. Repetition creates habit. Habit creates results. When discipline is identity-based, action happens even on bad days, especially on bad days. The shift begins when you stop asking how to motivate yourself and start asking who you are becoming. Every financial decision becomes a vote. You are either reinforcing the identity of someone who respects their money or someone who negotiates with impulse. These votes compound quietly. Financial discipline stops feeling forced when it stops being a task and starts being a standard. Standards do not require motivation, they require alignment. Once your identity changes, discipline follows naturally. Building a disciplined financial identity does not require dramatic change. It requires consistency in small, unglamorous actions. Identity is shaped by what you do repeatedly, not what you promise yourself. Each time you save before spending, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who plans ahead. Each time you pause before an impulse purchase, you strengthen the identity of someone who values control over comfort. These moments may feel insignificant, but they are not. They are proof. Most people try to change identity through affirmation or visualization alone. This fails because the brain trusts behavior more than words. You can tell yourself you are disciplined, but if your actions contradict that claim, the mind rejects it. Discipline must be demonstrated, not declared. The smallest consistent behaviors are the fastest way to rebuild self-trust. This is why disciplined people protect their routines fiercely. They do not rely on willpower to make good decisions. They remove choice wherever possible. Automatic transfers, fixed spending rules, and predefined limits turn discipline into default behavior. When discipline becomes automatic, identity solidifies. There will be moments when motivation disappears. Stress, boredom, and frustration will test your identity. In those moments, you do not negotiate. You act according to the person you are becoming. This is not punishment. It is alignment. Each time you follow through without motivation, your identity strengthens. The goal is not perfection, it is consistency. Missing once does not break identity, quitting does. Disciplined people recover quickly because their self-image remains intact. They do not spiral into shame, they return to baseline. When discipline becomes identity, you stop forcing yourself to behave differently. You start behaving differently because anything else feels out of character. That is when financial discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling natural.
Chapter 3. The Psychology of Impulse Spending. Impulse spending is not a money problem. It is an emotional regulation problem disguised as a financial one. Most people believe they spend impulsively because they lack discipline, but the truth is more uncomfortable. Impulse spending happens because the brain is trying to change how it feels in the moment. Money becomes a tool for emotional relief. When stress rises, spending soothes. When boredom appears, buying stimulates. When insecurity surfaces, purchasing restores a sense of control or status. None of this is conscious, it is automatic. The brain is wired to avoid discomfort and seek relief as efficiently as possible. Spending offers instant emotional feedback. You feel anticipation, reward, and temporary satisfaction. Saving offers none of these immediately. This imbalance makes impulse spending feel natural and discipline feel like deprivation. The brain does not evaluate long-term consequences during emotional activation. It focuses on relief. This is why logic fails in moments of impulse. You can know your budget, you can understand your goals, you can genuinely want financial stability and still overspend. Once emotion takes the wheel, logic becomes a passenger. Awareness alone does not stop this. Knowing why you spend does not prevent the urge from rising. Impulse spending is strengthened through repetition. Each time spending reduces discomfort, the brain learns that money equals relief. This creates a habit loop. Trigger emotion, spend money, feel better temporarily. Over time, the loop tightens. The urge becomes faster. The pause disappears. Modern systems amplify this loop. Convenience removes friction. One-click purchasing eliminates reflection. Marketing hijacks emotion by tying identity, success, and belonging to consumption. When impulse spending becomes easy, discipline requires structure. Without structure, awareness collapses under pressure. Impulse spending is not a character flaw. It is a learned response to emotional discomfort. Until you treat it as such, you will keep fighting symptoms instead of addressing causes. Financial discipline begins when you stop trying to outthink impulse and start redesigning the environment that feeds it.
To weaken impulse spending, you must interrupt the emotional loop that drives it. This does not begin with restriction. It begins with delay. Impulse loses power when time is introduced. Even a short pause forces the emotional surge to settle enough for logic to re-enter. This is why disciplined systems add friction. Removing saved cards, disabling one-click purchases, and creating waiting periods are not inconveniences. They are psychological safeguards. They buy you clarity when emotion is loud. Another critical step is separating emotion from identity. Many people spend impulsively because they attach meaning to the purchase. Buying becomes a way to feel competent, successful, or in control. When you recognize this pattern, you stop arguing with yourself about money and start addressing the emotional need underneath. You ask what you are actually trying to feel: comfort, relief, escape. Once identified, healthier alternatives can replace spending as the regulator. Impulse spending also weakens when decisions are made ahead of time. When rules are clear before emotion appears, there is nothing to debate in the moment. Disciplined people do not decide when they are tempted. They decide when they are calm. This removes negotiation from the equation. It is also important to reduce exposure. Constant stimulation fuels impulse. Endless scrolling, advertising, and comparison increase dissatisfaction and spending urges. Limiting these inputs reduces emotional volatility.
Less volatility means fewer impulses. Finally, discipline grows when you stop shaming yourself. Shame reinforces the loop by creating more discomfort, which invites more spending. Calm observation breaks it. When you treat impulse as information rather than failure, you regain control. Impulse spending fades not when you fight it harder, but when you understand it deeply and redesign your behavior around that understanding. Chapter 4. Building systems that remove choice. Most people believe discipline means making the right decision over and over again. This belief sets them up to fail. The human brain is not designed to make perfect choices consistently, especially under stress, fatigue, or emotion. Willpower is finite. It drains throughout the day. When financial discipline relies on repeated self-control, it eventually collapses. This is why systems matter more than effort. Systems remove choice, and when choice is removed, discipline becomes automatic. A system is any structure that guides behavior without requiring constant decision-making. Automatic savings transfers, fixed spending categories, and predefined limits are not restrictive, they are protective. They shield you from impulse and fatigue. When money moves before you touch it, discipline happens without debate. Most undisciplined financial behavior comes from too many decisions. Every choice creates friction. Should I buy this? Can I afford that? Should I save now or later? When these questions repeat daily, exhaustion sets in. Exhaustion leads to shortcuts. Shortcuts lead to mistakes. Systems eliminate this cycle by deciding once and executing repeatedly. Disciplined people do not trust themselves to feel strong forever. They assume weakness will appear and plan accordingly. They design their finances so that good behavior happens by default and bad behavior requires effort. This reversal is powerful. When spending requires friction and saving is automatic, discipline no longer feels forced. Removing choice also reduces emotional negotiation. You are no longer arguing with yourself. You are following a structure you already agreed to. This preserves energy and consistency. Over time, consistency compounds. Building systems is not about perfection, it is about reliability. The goal is not to never fail, it is to make failure harder than success. When systems are in place, discipline becomes less about who you are in the moment and more about how you have designed your environment. The effectiveness of systems comes from their ability to operate when motivation disappears. On good days, discipline feels easy. On bad days, systems carry you forward without negotiation. This is why disciplined people invest time up front designing their financial environment. They know that future versions of themselves will not always be calm, focused, or rational. Systems are built to protect against those moments. A well-designed system reduces emotional exposure. Money is moved, saved, and allocated before emotion has a chance to interfere. Bills are automated, savings are invisible, spending limits are clear. When emotion shows up, there is nothing to decide. The structure has already decided for you. This removes guilt, stress, and internal conflict. Systems also create consistency through repetition. Each automated action reinforces the same behavior pattern. Over time, this pattern becomes familiar. Familiarity reduces resistance. Discipline no longer feels like effort because it is no longer an active choice. It becomes routine. Many people resist systems because they fear loss of freedom. In reality, systems create freedom. They remove constant financial stress and decision fatigue. They allow you to enjoy money without anxiety because limits are already defined. Freedom without structure leads to chaos. Structure creates sustainable freedom. It is important to start small. Systems do not need to be complex. One automatic transfer, one spending rule, one protected account. Small systems build trust. Trust encourages expansion.
Over time, your financial life becomes orderly, not through force, but through design. When discipline is system-driven, setbacks lose their power. A missed action does not collapse progress because the system resets automatically. There is no shame spiral, there is no restart mentality, there is only continuation. The moment you stop relying on willpower and start relying on structure, financial discipline stops feeling like a personal battle. It becomes a process, and processes, unlike motivation, do not disappear when life gets difficult.
Chapter 5. Learning to delay pleasure without misery. Most people associate delayed gratification with suffering. They imagine discipline as a constant state of denial, where enjoyment is postponed indefinitely in exchange for a future that feels vague and distant. This belief makes financial discipline feel punishing before it even begins. The truth is that disciplined people do not live joyless lives. They simply experience pleasure differently. They do not eliminate pleasure, they sequence it. The brain is wired to seek reward. When pleasure is removed entirely, resistance builds. Discipline collapses not because the goal is wrong, but because the process feels unsustainable. This is why extreme restriction fails. It creates deprivation, which eventually demands compensation. Delayed pleasure must be paired with intention, not misery. Disciplined people understand that saying no now does not mean saying no forever. It means saying yes later, with less stress and more freedom. This reframe changes everything. Saving is no longer loss, it becomes preparation. Restraint becomes choice rather than sacrifice. Another reason delay feels painful is because rewards are too abstract. Saving for a future that feels undefined offers no emotional feedback. Disciplined people solve this by making future rewards visible. They assign meaning to savings, a calmer life, security, options. When the reward feels real, delay becomes tolerable. There is also the issue of identity. When restraint feels like punishment, it signals that discipline is not aligned with who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who deserves enjoyment now because life is hard, delay feels unfair. Changing this belief requires redefining pleasure itself. Pleasure does not disappear when delayed. It often intensifies. The anticipation, the absence of guilt, and the stability that comes with disciplined choices create a deeper satisfaction than impulse ever could. Learning to delay pleasure is not about becoming rigid, it is about becoming intentional. Delayed pleasure becomes sustainable when it is paired with replacement rather than removal. Disciplined people do not rely on denial alone. They replace impulsive pleasure with controlled rewards that do not sabotage long-term goals. This could mean budgeting enjoyment intentionally, celebrating progress, or choosing experiences that provide fulfillment without financial damage. When pleasure is planned, it no longer feels stolen, it feels earned. Another key shift is learning to tolerate mild discomfort without reacting to it. Most impulses are not emergencies, they are sensations that rise and fall. When you allow the urge to pass without acting, you train your nervous system to trust restraint. Each time you do this, the intensity of future urges decreases. Delay becomes easier because the brain learns that nothing bad happens when you wait. Disciplined people also shorten the feedback loop of delay. Instead of waiting years to feel rewarded, they track progress visibly. Watching savings grow, debts shrink, or systems stabilize creates satisfaction in the present. Progress itself becomes rewarding. This transforms delay from punishment into participation. It is also important to detach pleasure from spending. Many people equate enjoyment with purchase. This belief keeps them trapped. When you diversify pleasure through habits, health, progress and peace of mind, spending loses its emotional dominance. Money stops being the primary source of relief. Delay without misery requires compassion. Harsh self-control breeds rebellion. Calm consistency builds trust. When you treat discipline as an act of self-respect rather than self-denial, pleasure no longer feels forbidden, it feels timed. Over time, the brain adapts. What once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like strength. You stop craving immediate reward because long-term stability feels better. Delayed pleasure stops being delay at all. It becomes preference.
Chapter 6. The Power of Boring Consistency. Most people believe transformation comes from intensity, big changes, sudden breakthroughs, dramatic sacrifices. This belief keeps them stuck because intensity is unsustainable. Financial discipline is not built through dramatic effort, it is built through boring consistency. Small actions repeated without emotion quietly reshape your financial life. Boring consistency works because it aligns with how habits are formed. The brain resists radical change, but adapts easily to repetition. When an action is small enough, it does not trigger resistance. When it is repeated enough, it becomes automatic. This is why consistent saving beats occasional discipline. 10% saved every month for years will outperform sporadic bursts of motivation every time. Most people abandon discipline because they expect visible progress too quickly. When results are slow, they assume the system is broken. Disciplined people expect slowness. They understand that progress compounds invisibly before it becomes obvious. They stay consistent not because they feel rewarded immediately, but because consistency itself becomes the reward. Boring consistency removes emotional drama from money. There are no highs or lows, no urgent decisions, no constant course corrections. Money becomes predictable. Predictability reduces stress. Reduced stress makes discipline easier to maintain. This creates a reinforcing loop where calm leads to consistency and consistency leads to calm. Consistency also builds self-trust. Each small action is a promise kept. Over time, these promises accumulate. You begin to see yourself differently. You stop identifying as someone who tries and starts identifying as someone who follows through. This identity shift is subtle but powerful. Boring consistency does not feel impressive. It feels uneventful. That is exactly why it works. Discipline thrives when it is quiet. When actions become routine, they no longer drain willpower. They simply happen. The hardest part of consistency is accepting that it will not feel exciting. Once you make peace with that, discipline becomes easier. You stop waiting for motivation and start respecting routine. And routine, when protected long enough, builds a financial life that no longer depends on emotional strength. Boring consistency protects you from the emotional traps that derail most financial plans. When actions are routine, there is nothing to negotiate. You do not wake up asking whether today feels like a saving day. You already know what happens. This certainty removes friction. Friction is what drains discipline. Consistency also reduces the impact of bad days. Everyone has moments of stress, fatigue, or doubt. When your financial behavior depends on mood, those days undo progress. When behavior is routine, bad days lose their power. The system carries you forward even when you are not at your best. Many people sabotage themselves by trying to optimize too early. They tweak, adjust, and restart instead of staying the course. Disciplined people resist this urge. They understand that stability matters more than perfection. A simple plan followed consistently outperforms a perfect plan followed inconsistently. There is a quiet confidence that comes from boring consistency. You stop needing external validation because your progress is internally visible. You know you are moving forward even when no one else sees it. This confidence reinforces discipline. It makes quitting feel out of character. Consistency also creates momentum. Each small action reinforces the next. Over time, effort decreases because habits take over. What once required intention now requires almost nothing. This is the compounding effect most people underestimate, not just of money, but of behavior. The power of boring consistency is that it does not ask for greatness, it asks for presence. Show up, do the small thing, repeat. Over weeks and months, this simplicity becomes strength. When you commit to consistency, discipline stops being a daily battle. It becomes a background process. And when discipline lives in the background, progress accelerates without stress.
Chapter 7. Breaking the Cycle of Self-Sabotage. Most people do not fail financially because they lack opportunity. They fail because they destroy their own progress the moment it begins to feel real. Self-sabotage appears right after momentum builds. A savings account grows, discipline stabilizes, and suddenly a reckless decision wipes the slate clean. This pattern is not accidental, it is psychological. Self-sabotage often comes from discomfort with stability. Chaos feels familiar, struggle feels normal. When life begins to feel orderly, the nervous system searches for disruption. This is especially true for people who grew up around financial stress, inconsistency, or emotional unpredictability. Stability feels foreign. The brain confuses unfamiliar calm with danger. There is also fear attached to success. Progress raises expectations. Expectations create pressure. Pressure activates anxiety. Self-sabotage becomes a release valve. By destroying progress, the pressure disappears. You return to what you know. Starting over feels safer than maintaining success. Another layer of sabotage comes from identity conflict. If you have spent years seeing yourself as irresponsible with money, disciplined behavior creates tension. Your actions no longer match your self-image. The mind resolves this conflict by pulling behavior back in line with identity. You overspend, you stop tracking, you ignore systems. Not because you want to fail, but because the old identity feels more believable. Self-sabotage is also fueled by emotional exhaustion. Discipline requires consistency, and consistency requires patience. When progress feels slow, frustration builds. That frustration looks for escape. Impulsive decisions provide instant relief. The cost is long-term stability. Breaking this cycle requires awareness without shame. Sabotage thrives on self-criticism. Each failure reinforces the belief that you cannot be trusted. Disciplined people interrupt this pattern by responding differently. They do not punish mistakes, they study them. They ask what triggered the behavior and adjust the system. Self-sabotage is not a flaw, it is a signal. It points to unresolved emotional patterns around money, identity, and safety. Until those patterns are addressed, discipline will always reset. Breaking the cycle begins with understanding why progress feels threatening and learning how to stay grounded when things finally start working. Breaking self-sabotage requires replacing emotional reactions with structure. When progress triggers anxiety, discipline must be protected by systems rather than feelings. This is why disciplined people tighten routines when momentum builds instead of loosening them. They recognize that the moment things start working is often the most dangerous moment of all. Structure creates safety when identity feels unstable. Another critical step is learning to normalize progress. Many people unconsciously believe that success must be dramatic or permanent to be real. When progress feels small or slow, they dismiss it. This dismissal creates frustration. Frustration invites sabotage. Disciplined people treat small wins as confirmation rather than disappointment. They understand that stability is built quietly. It is also essential to decouple mistakes from identity. A setback does not mean you are undisciplined, it means a system was stressed. When you interpret mistakes as information instead of failure, recovery becomes faster. You return to baseline instead of restarting from zero. This is how disciplined people avoid collapse. They do not spiral, they recalibrate. Self-sabotage weakens when you reduce emotional stakes. When money decisions feel like judgments about your worth, pressure increases. Pressure creates rebellion. Calm detachment restores control. You act not to prove anything, but to maintain order. Another powerful shift is anticipating sabotage before it happens. When you notice progress, you prepare for discomfort. You expect urges to break routine. You expect thoughts that justify deviation. Awareness neutralizes them. When the urge arrives, it feels familiar instead of overwhelming. Finally, discipline stabilizes when you build tolerance for success. You allow life to feel calm without disrupting it. You resist the urge to create drama where none is needed. This takes practice, but each time you stay steady instead of self-destructive, the nervous system learns a new baseline. Breaking self-sabotage is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming consistent even when discomfort appears. When stability stops feeling threatening, discipline no longer resets, it compounds.
Chapter 8. Discipline during stress and setbacks. Financial discipline is easiest when life is calm, plans feel manageable, systems run smoothly, motivation appears without effort. The real test arrives when stress enters the picture. Unexpected expenses, emotional strain, fatigue, or uncertainty pressure your nervous system and expose the fragility of discipline that relies on ideal conditions. Most people do not lose discipline because they forget their goals. They lose it because stress overwhelms their capacity to regulate emotion. Stress narrows perspective. The brain shifts into survival mode and prioritizes immediate relief over long-term planning. In this state, discipline feels like a burden rather than protection. Saving feels pointless. Structure feels restrictive. Impulse feels justified. This is why setbacks often trigger spending, avoidance, or complete disengagement from financial systems. It is not laziness, it is emotional overload. Setbacks also activate shame. A missed payment, a financial mistake, or an unexpected loss can quickly spiral into self-judgment. Shame drains energy and clarity. Instead of correcting the issue, people withdraw. They stop checking accounts. They avoid numbers. Avoidance creates more damage than the original setback. Discipline collapses not because the situation is hopeless, but because emotional response blocks recovery. Disciplined people approach stress differently. They do not expect perfection during difficult periods. They expect containment. Their goal is not progress during chaos, it is damage control. They focus on maintaining the minimum viable structure. Bills are paid. Savings may pause, but they do not reverse. Systems stay intact even if growth slows. This mindset prevents collapse. Discipline during stress is about holding the line rather than advancing it. You accept that some seasons are about survival, not optimization. This acceptance reduces internal pressure. Reduced pressure restores clarity. Clarity allows discipline to remain present even when progress feels small. Setbacks do not erase discipline.
They reveal whether discipline was built on emotion or structure. When systems exist, discipline bends without breaking. When discipline relies on motivation, it shatters under stress. Understanding this distinction is critical to building financial behavior that survives real life rather than ideal conditions. Maintaining discipline during stress requires simplifying rather than intensifying effort. When pressure rises, most people try to do more to regain control. This backfires. Complexity increases decision fatigue. Discipline weakens further. Disciplined people do the opposite. They reduce actions to essentials, one account check instead of many, one fixed rule instead of constant adjustment. Simplicity preserves stability when the nervous system is strained. Another key skill is separating setbacks from identity. Stressful periods create mistakes, but mistakes are not definitions. When you interpret a setback as proof that you cannot be disciplined, motivation collapses. When you interpret it as a temporary condition, recovery becomes possible. Disciplined people expect disruption. They prepare mentally for it. This expectation removes surprise, and surprise is what triggers emotional spirals. It is also important to shorten your time horizon during stress. Long-term goals can feel overwhelming when immediate problems demand attention. Instead of focusing on years ahead, disciplined people focus on today, what must be maintained right now. This keeps discipline manageable. Survival today creates progress tomorrow. Support systems matter more during setbacks. This does not mean seeking permission to abandon discipline. It means creating accountability that does not shame. Automated systems, reminders, and simplified budgets act as external stability when internal stability is low. Most importantly, discipline survives stress when compassion replaces punishment. Harsh self-criticism increases emotional load. Increased emotional load invites avoidance. Calm self-correction restores control. You acknowledge the difficulty without surrendering standards. Stress will always test discipline. The goal is not to eliminate stress. It is to build discipline that adapts to it. When discipline can survive pressure, it becomes reliable, and reliability is what turns financial discipline from a phase into a permanent trait. Chapter 9. Becoming someone who respects their own money. Financial discipline deepens when money stops being treated as something external and starts being treated as something personal. Many people say they want more money, but their behavior shows something different. They neglect it, they misuse it, they treat it casually. This disconnect comes from a lack of self-respect expressed through financial behavior. How you handle money is often how you handle yourself. Respecting your money does not mean obsessing over it. It means handling it with intention. Disciplined people do not see money as something to escape stress or fill emotional gaps. They see it as a resource that reflects their values. Each decision becomes a signal of self-regard. Spending recklessly communicates disregard. Saving intentionally communicates care. Most people disrespect their money without realizing it. They ignore balances. They avoid planning. They treat future obligations as someone else's problem. This avoidance erodes trust. When you cannot trust yourself with money, discipline feels forced. Respect rebuilds trust. Respect also shows up in boundaries. Disciplined people do not spend to impress. They do not borrow comfort from the future. They do not sacrifice stability for approval. These behaviors are not moral choices. They are identity choices. They reflect how much value you place on your future self. When you begin treating money as an extension of self-respect, discipline changes tone. It no longer feels restrictive. It feels protective. You are not denying yourself. You are taking care of yourself.
This shift transforms behavior without requiring motivation. Respecting your money also requires honesty. You face numbers even when they are uncomfortable. You acknowledge mistakes without drama. You make adjustments without shame. This honesty removes fear. Fear is what drives avoidance. When fear disappears, discipline strengthens. Becoming someone who respects their own money is not about income, it is about posture. It is about deciding that your future stability matters enough to be defended consistently.
Self-respect expressed through money is built in quiet moments, not dramatic gestures. It shows up when no one is watching and no reward is immediate. Each time you choose not to spend impulsively, each time you review your finances instead of avoiding them, you reinforce a relationship of trust with yourself. Trust changes behavior more reliably than pressure ever could. Many people wait to respect their money until they have more of it. This is backward. Respect is what creates stability, not abundance. When you treat small amounts of money with care, you build habits that scale. When you treat money casually, no amount will ever feel sufficient. Discipline grows from how you handle what you already have. Respect also involves consistency in standards. Disciplined people do not change their rules based on mood. They do not justify exceptions emotionally. They maintain the same level of care whether money feels tight or abundant. This consistency creates internal alignment. You stop negotiating with yourself. You act according to principle. Another important shift is separating self-worth from spending power. Many people spend to feel valuable. Disciplined people already feel grounded. They do not need purchases to validate them. This emotional independence reduces impulsive behavior naturally. Respecting your money also means forgiving past mistakes without repeating them. Shame keeps people stuck. Calm accountability moves them forward. When you treat mistakes as lessons instead of labels, progress accelerates. Over time, this respectful posture becomes identity. You no longer need to force discipline. Acting carelessly feels uncomfortable because it contradicts who you are. This is the strongest form of discipline available. When you respect your money, money begins to work with you instead of against you. Stability replaces chaos, confidence replaces anxiety, and discipline becomes a natural extension of self-respect rather than a constant struggle. Chapter 10. Financial Discipline as a Permanent Lifestyle. Most people treat financial discipline as a temporary phase, something they do when things get bad or when motivation strikes. They save for a few months, pay off some debt, then slowly drift back into old habits. This cycle repeats because discipline was never meant to be a short-term fix. It was meant to become a lifestyle. Until discipline is integrated into how you live, it will always feel like something you start and stop. A permanent lifestyle is built on predictability. Disciplined people do not reinvent their financial behavior every year. They settle into rhythms that remove drama from money. Saving happens quietly. Spending follows clear rules. Planning becomes routine. Because nothing feels urgent, nothing feels overwhelming. This steadiness is what makes discipline sustainable. Financial discipline becomes permanent when it stops being tied to goals and starts being tied to values. Goals end, values remain. You may reach a savings target, pay off debt, or increase income, but the behavior that got you there must continue. Disciplined people do not abandon structure once progress appears. They maintain it because it reflects who they are. Another key shift is accepting that discipline does not eliminate desire, it manages it. Wanting more will never disappear. New temptations will always appear. A disciplined lifestyle does not rely on avoiding desire. It relies on not being ruled by it. This distinction matters. When discipline is built around avoidance, it collapses under pressure.
When it is built around choice, it endures. A permanent approach also includes recovery. Disciplined people expect mistakes. They do not dramatize them. They correct quickly and return to baseline. This ability to recover without resetting is what keeps discipline intact long term. Financial discipline becomes a lifestyle when it is boring, consistent, and deeply aligned with self-respect. At that point, it no longer feels like effort, it feels like maintenance, and maintenance is sustainable for life.
When financial discipline becomes a lifestyle, it stops demanding attention. You no longer think about being disciplined. You simply live in a way that reflects order, foresight, and restraint. Money decisions become routine, not emotional events. This is the point where discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling natural. A permanent lifestyle is built by protecting structure even when things are going well. This is where most people fail. As soon as pressure lifts, they loosen standards. Disciplined people do the opposite. They maintain routines precisely because life feels stable. Stability is not a signal to relax discipline. It is proof that discipline is working. Lifestyle discipline also means designing your environment to support your values. You reduce exposure to temptation. You simplify choices. You surround yourself with systems and people that reinforce consistency rather than chaos. Over time, discipline becomes the default rather than the exception. Another important shift is emotional neutrality around money. Disciplined people do not experience constant anxiety or excitement about finances. Money becomes functional. It serves goals rather than emotions. This neutrality reduces impulsive behavior without effort. A disciplined lifestyle is not rigid. It adapts without breaking. When income changes, systems adjust. When stress increases, effort simplifies. The core principles remain intact even as details evolve. This flexibility prevents burnout. Most importantly, permanent discipline changes how you see yourself. You stop identifying as someone who is trying to get better with money. You see yourself as someone who already lives with financial order. This identity makes regression uncomfortable and progress natural. When discipline becomes lifestyle, there is no finish line. There is only continuation. And that continuation quietly builds stability, confidence, and freedom over time, without drama or force.
Financial discipline is not something you force for a season. It is something you become. Throughout this audiobook, you have learned that discipline is not built through motivation, punishment, or restriction. It is built through identity, structure, and self-respect. When you stop relying on emotion and start designing your behavior intentionally, money stops being a source of stress and starts becoming a tool for stability. Discipline is not about saying no to life. It is about saying yes to a future that feels calm instead of chaotic. When systems replace willpower, when consistency replaces intensity, and when respect replaces shame, discipline becomes sustainable. You no longer need to fight impulse. You outgrow it. You no longer restart every few months. You continue. This is what separates people who struggle financially from those who remain stable no matter the circumstances. The strongest form of discipline is quiet. It shows up in small decisions made repeatedly without drama. Over time, those decisions reshape your identity. You stop trying to be disciplined. You simply live that way. Financial discipline, once integrated into your lifestyle, protects your peace, strengthens your confidence, and gives you freedom that does not depend on income alone. This is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of a life where money finally works for you instead of against you.